Hello everybody, it is Salty Boy bringing you another video, today talking about MTG Commander, EDH. MTG stands for Magic the Gathering. It's a card game that I've been playing with my friends for a while. We're a lot of fun. Commander is a format in Magic the Gathering, uh, talking about a format where each person has 40 life. Every person has a commander. My commander, Nekisar the Mind Razor. I'll be talking about him a little later, but just get a little look what he looks like. Getting into the deck and why I love it so much. Nekisar is a personal favorite of mine. He's a Grixis color deck, and my first custom made deck, so I had a lot of fun building the deck. But it's not much talking about today. Talking about issues I see Commander players making when making their deck and things they should really improve on to help them do better. So I'll be talking about ways to improve their deck, how to create a template for deck making, kind of like a general guideline on how they can build their deck better, and following a theme on how to win. Okay, so in my friend group, there are multiple issues with people's decks that I see currently. Bigger one is that I never see anyone have card draw. Card draw is really important. Making a commander deck, you have 99 cards. Every card is unique. You need to get to your cards as fast as possible that you might need to get out of a situation. If you can't get there, if you're drawing one card per turn, top decking, hoping to get an answer to the board that's getting out of control, or to play creatures down, you're gonna lose. That's just what's gonna happen. Like you need a way to get through your deck. Also, it helps learn what your deck does. If you're first playing your deck, sometimes I'll add more card draw in my deck just to see what my deck does. I can see more of my deck. If you only see 15 to 20% of your deck, you're not really sure what your deck does. But if you draw half your deck, you're like pretty sure after a couple of games, like you're gonna know what your deck kind of does and like how to learn it faster, since you're drawing more of the cards of your deck. Alright, ramp. Players just don't want to run ramp at all, or they refuse to run ramp because they think it's too expensive. There's a lot of cheap alternative, super cheap mana rocks that you can run that'll help you ramp and add your deck. Cards such as Hedron Archive, Worn Power Stone, Star Compass, Commander Sphere, Everflowing Chalice, or any of the signets. Um, I believe that you should have at least 4 to 6 ramp cards in your deck, depending on your curve. I think you should have more, but I'm not gonna push people to do that. Also, people want to run a lot of fun cards like flashy that do a lot of cool things and uh, don't like mana like ramping isn't super fun. Like it's not like ooh I'm doing cool things. They want to run like lightning bolt and blast a player and do 30 damage to them, or do something else like that and powers the board. But you need to play these like build up cards so you can play your big flashy cards. Because if you have a bunch of flashy cards in your hand and you can't play any of them, then they're no use to you. Alright, number 3, your theme. I'm not talking about the flavor of your deck. I'm talking about your goal, your win con for the deck. What your goals your deck is trying to accomplish. You want your deck focused around one main strategy with a couple of side strategies that help your main strategy go through. Um, so if you're an aggressive player, for example, you want to win by swinging at your opponent and bringing their life to 0, or killing them with your commander, with commander damage. Um, but a side strategy you can have in an aggro deck is that you can make tokens, and the tokens can also swing at them and get some token generators to buff up all your creatures and go wide and swing with a bunch of little creatures to kill your opponents. So it's a good example of a good side strategy that works with your main strategy. Okay, talking about the next point of the video. Neki started the Mind Razor, and while I'm talking about it, featuring it in this video, it's a pretty good example of a deck that follows these core principles pretty well. It's a pretty solid deck. Not saying it's perfect, but it's a pretty solid deck on a budget. Um, I'd say the deck power is about a 6. Explaining the tiers, 1 to 2 is like jank. You kind of just threw a bunch of cards together in a deck. Um, and they're not super like great together. They kind of just made the deck the cards you had that were available, kind of just threw them all together. 3 to 4 is more of a casual deck, so you kind of like have more idea of what's going on, but you're not really like have like a main theme. They're kind of just like your cards are value like greater value together, kind of, but you're not like focused on a goal. 5 to 6, which are where most of my decks fall, is more focused about like what your theme is. Your cards work well together. You have like better synergies with your cards, and you can actually like focus on a win condition and kind of follow my tips better. Um, and pretty much everything above a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 is like really competitive stuff. They're running like mana drain or mana vault stuff like that. Super expensive cards, expropriate, the whole 9 yards. This is if we're playing on a budget, we're probably not going to get past a 6, unless you want to spend a bunch of money, which not everyone has that to do. Okay, so my deck has a pretty high curve since it's a big spell slinger deck with some X spells that can win me the game. Um, so my deck kind of wins off of like everyone's getting kind of low when I play a spell and it kills everybody before anyone can react. So my main win condition is for everyone to draw a bunch of cards and take damage little by little until I play a big spell or a wheel and everyone draws a bunch of cards and dies. So cards I like to play that can end the game quickly. One of my favorite cards in the deck is Prosperity. Prosperity is X, a gray X card, gray X spell, and a blue. Sorcery, each player draws X cards, so everyone can draw a bunch of cards and die to Nike start pinging them. Because Nike Star says each time you draw a card and your opponent of mine, Nike Star does you take a damage. Pretty much for every card you draw. Um, let's see. Yeah, it's talking about that. Yep. Okay. Ramp. So as I talked about earlier, my deck has a pretty big curve, and ramp's pretty important. So I run about 8 ramp cards. I run all the cards I mentioned earlier. So I thought this deck's pretty good template because it kind of really shows like how you can make a good deck on budget. And I think 8 ramp cards is decent. I think you could run a little bit more, but depending on how your deck is, right? Like of course, it's hard to give general advice to every deck because every deck is different and has different win conditions and needs mana ramp differently. But generally, ramp is really good, and I would recommend running it. Yeah. Ramp is super good. I like artifacts because generally, if your play group is more casual or isn't super like advanced, people won't have a lot of artifact removal because people don't usually run ramp in your group anyway, so your ramp's gonna stay around longer. Uh, anyway, okay. I kind of talked about my general theme of my deck, but I have a bunch of wheel effects and stuff like Magus of the Wheel. It's a creature, 2 gray, 1 red. For 1 gray and 1 red, you can tap it, sacrifice Magus of the Wheel. Each player discards his or her hand and draws 7 cards. Super good card in my deck, especially if I have a card like Migrum on the field. Says Migrum. It says whenever it's 2 gray, 1 black. Enchantment: when an opponent discards a card, Magnum deals 2 damage to that player. So they discard all their cards, take a bunch of damage, and then I can get value from a card like Waste Not, which says 1 gray, 1 black, and it's also an enchantment. It says whenever an opponent discards a creature card, I get a 2/2 black zombie onto the battlefield. When they discard a land, I get 2 black mana, and when discards a non-creature, non-land, I draw a card. So I just get a bunch of value from cards I discarded. This deck is really cool. Um, I like it a lot. It's basically like an interesting deck that kind of runs a lot of spells, not a lot of creatures. Side theme of my deck is toxicity. Of course, we're salty boys, so we gotta have toxicity as our side theme. So a perfect example of the cards in our deck are cards like Worst Fears. Worst Fears is 7 gray, 1 black sorcery. It says you control target player during their next turn. So I pretty much take their turn and do things to put them behind or give me a turn to stall while I'm getting my answers together. Now, one of my key cards for my deck is Captive Audience. Captive Audience is 5 gray, 1 black, 1 red. It's an enchantment, but it's an enchantment for your opponent. So the Captive Audience enters the battlefield under the control of the opponent of your choice. At the beginning, it's just like for the player that has the enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, choose one that hasn't been chosen yet. Your life total becomes 4. Discard your hand, or each opponent creates a 5/5 2 black zombie creatures. So you're just on a timer to deal with this card, or you're just gonna lose, pretty much. Um, so hopefully in the future I can talk about more about my deck specifically. But today I was kind of just talking about chip tips people can do with their decks, specifically. Okay, thanks for listening to my tips about deck making and deck building. Next time I'll talk about more specifically about my Nekisar deck and how to play a spell heavy deck with light creatures. Thanks. Have a great